thank you for joining us on Let the Healing Begin podcast. I am your host, Asia, and today we have Robyn Sears with us. How are you doing, Robyn?
I am doing well, Aisha. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life to be here.
Yeah, it is my pleasure.
I appreciate you. So whereabouts are you from?
Originally, I am from Houston, Texas.
Okay.
So I was born in Texas and lived there until I was a teenager, and then moved to Jacksonville, Florida. But currently, I am outside of Atlanta, about an hour outside the city.
Okay. So what made you move?
Yeah, moved from Jacksonville. I got married really young. And so we moved up here really for my husband's job, my ex-husband's job, I should say.
Okay. So tell me this, like, as far as your childhood, what was that like growing up in your house?
Yeah, I would say I had a pretty normal childhood. And it's interesting because some of my girlfriends that I'm still friends with from like middle school and high school, or back in the day, we called it junior high. I don't call it that anymore. I like date myself. Yeah, it was, it was pretty normal. We had a two-parent home. It was just my sister and I, and then my grandmother moved in with us. I think I was maybe 9. Well, were still living in Texas, and then, but she was an alcoholic, and things shifted in our home, and we moved from Texas to Florida after my grandmother moved in with us, and life became a little bit different. I didn't understand. I loved my grandmother, but before that, I only saw her like once a year for spring break, and I didn't understand why she was angry. And so, yeah, so things shifted for me. She loved my sister, but for whatever reason, I just was not the favorite, or anywhere near it. And I just remember her just being unkind. But, as an adult, I look back and I think she was really unhappy. And she turned to alcohol to just numb the pain.
Now let me ask you this. Would you and your sister ever talk about this?
Yeah, we did. My sister, she's 4 years older than I am. And we always just kind of joke because I am more mature than she is. And and she readily admits this as well. So I'm not saying something that she wouldn't agree with, but I grew up a lot faster than she did. And so I don't know. But yeah, my sister definitely saw it. My parents saw it. And my mother, I think, tried to be a buffer. And my dad, I think, just stuck his head in the sand. That was his mother. And he really just kind of stuck his head in the sand.
Now, let me ask you this. With that being your dad's mom, was she like that towards him as well?
I think my dad he was the middle of 2 brothers, and they had a very different lifestyle and upbringing than we did. My grandparents lived in New York City, and they traveled a lot. And my dad and his 2 brothers actually went to boarding school from a very young age. And I remember my dad just always being scared, and he hated it. He wanted to be at home with his mom. But she really wasn't all that interested. So I think it just was something about her that maybe she just really wasn't all that interested in being a parent. So, but yeah, I don't know. My dad's youngest brother passed away a couple of years ago, and I remember him kind of talking about his experience as a child. And he had just, of course, very, you grow up in the same household, people, and everybody has a different, experience. And he had a very different experience with my grandmother than my dad did. And I'm sure that the older brother did as well. But you ask about like what my childhood was like, and it was very normal until my parents divorced when I was 19.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it was like, who invited Jerry Springer into our home? Because things got just I was like, this is weird. Like we didn't, I mean, it was pretty normal. Um I um I got married young. I got married and I had my oldest son when I was 17
Okay.
and moved out and then my parents got divorced and it was bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Um and then just I think my dad just went off the rails. Um, and eventually remarried and somewhat settled down, but our relationship was never really the same after that because
When
she
you
was
say
very,
I'm sorry, when you say your relationship was never the same, you mean you and your dad's?
yeah, me and my dad, our relationship was never the same because growing up, he'd always been very family oriented. And we
Mhm.
would do family dinner on Sunday night, and it was sort of mandatory. You had to be home, even as a teenager. You could bring your friends could come over. He didn't care, but you had to be home. And then after that it was just like he didn't have time for my sister and I anymore, and so things really changed. And my stepmother didn't I think she was just very intimidated um, by the relationship that my dad had with my sister and I, and really drove a wedge in our family. And I handled it differently than my sister did. My sister did not handle it well,
Mhm.
and has subsequently just really struggled with alcohol herself. And she's in recovery, which is fantastic, but created a lot of just challenging relationship issues, uh, and it was just an interesting, well, I'll say season, but it's like, 20 some odd years ago.
Yeah.
My dad has since passed away. So we no longer struggle with that. But when he died, we didn't have a relationship.
Mm. So let me ask you this. When he passed away, and I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
When he passed away, with you guys being like not close anymore, how did you take it?
Uh, Gosh, that's a great question. Um, I had been grieving the relationship with my dad for probably 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he died, I felt like I had already grieved.
Mm.
And so I didn't really have any grief left.
Now I got another question for you. Because I talk all the time about like with different clients and stuff about like grieving people that are still alive. And grief with grief, it's what's tricky about it is it's not only people that we grieve. We can grieve a lost job, we can grieve an old house. Like it's so
Sure.
much that you can grieve. And also like we can grieve people that are not even dead yet. So tell me what that process was like. How did you manage to get through that?
Honestly, it was really hard because the dad that I knew growing up, who, well, he worked a lot and he traveled for work, but there were, definite, like you'd be home for Sunday dinner and we would go to church and, um, holidays and things like that. That was the dad that I expected as an adult.
Mm,
And when my parents divorced, it really made me realize, which I think I already knew, but then it was like, oh yeah, well, duh. My mother was the glue,
mm,
right?
yeah.
And because my mom was the one who, like, she was able to stay home, was blessed to do that, and so she was the one that was always there. She took care of everything,
Yeah.
and she was the one who was always who picked up the pieces. And so then when my dad left, it was still my mom doing the same thing, and just the recognition that was like, well, Sunday dinner really wasn't driven by my dad, it was really driven by my mom.
Yeah.
But my dad had this big gregarious personality. And so when he went into a room and, everybody was like, oh, there's Doug, just kind of would, just the center of attention whenever he was in a room. And so when my dad left and he um, remarried, I just have these very distinct memories um, of just trying to have that same relationship and struggling to navigate what it looked like to be new, like to have this new relationship. And I never felt like I could get on firm footing. And when I would ask him or say like, Dad, like I don't, like I miss you. I don't feel like we can have the same relationship. He always just brushed it off because my dad didn't like confrontation,
Yeah.
and things were always somebody else's fault. And everything's fine. I don't know why you say that. So then I'm the one with the problem,
Hmm.
right? Which I now think we call that gaslighting, right? But
That's what we call it.
that's what we call it. And gaslighting doesn't have to be done in an ugly way, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be done in a loud voice. It doesn't have to be done um, in a really overt way. It can be done in a really covert way. So,
Mhm.
which is why I think I missed it.
Mm.
Because my dad was a gentle person. Like he yelling did not happen in our household unless it was my sister and I yelling at each other. But my parents didn't yell at each other. And that was just, so my dad just had this quietly manipulative way.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I got some distance from him
That you
that I
finally saw it.
really, yeah, that I finally saw it. And so as the years progressed, and I have three children, and my oldest son had the most relationship with him,
Mm.
and has more memories with him. And my other two children really don't remember my dad at all.
Really?
I think I can probably count on one hand the number of times that my daughter saw my father,
Really?
um, because we just no longer became a priority.
Is that
And
hurtful for you?
oh, incredibly so, because I always thought that, my dad would be this great grandfather and he would come to all the things and do all the things. And then he couldn't be bothered.
Do you-
Uh,
I'm sorry. Do you think that that was because of his wife, or he just
I
kind of
think,
lost that sense of family?
well, I think it was definitely part of it was his wife. And I think she just felt threatened
Mhm.
by, just our relationship. And she didn't really have the same relationship with her children.
Mm.
And instead of us being a bonus, like I have two stepsons and I look at them as a bonus. They are a gift to me.
Absolutely.
And if my husband needs to go spend time with them alone, please invest in your relationship with your children.
Yes.
I could never imagine putting a wedge
And you know,
and
it's a really sad truth. It's sad that, and I know it doesn't just stop at women. Like I'm sure there's some men too that are insecure.
yep,
But I completely agree with you. Like by all means, when we get additional kids, like that's a bonus,
it's
or
bonus.
additional people to love and to love us. But not everybody can step back and look at things that way. It is so sad because it's like, why would you want any father or any mother or any person to not spend as much time as possible with their family, and let alone their children? These are the people that they contributed and given life to,
Yeah, yeah,
it's so sad. Um, this is what I wanted to ask you. I know you said that like in your house there was no yelling and things like that. How do you feel like that may have like contributed to you into who you are today? And when you hear someone yelling, does that kind of like, is it like a ill for you?
yeah. That's a really interesting question. I think up until after I turned 40, is when I finally realized that confrontation is not a bad word,
Yeah.
right? It's not bad. And you can do confrontation in a positive way.
Hmm.
And so growing up, both of my parents were passive. And so I learned to be passive. And passivity can turn into passive aggressiveness. And that's not healthy. So I just learned that if there's an elephant in the room, you just shove it under the carpet.
Ah.
Yeah. And then I got divorced when I was in my early 30s. And then I thought, oh, I am confronting everything, like, and then I just became this like over the top, I went from like 0 to 100 in a span of like 10 months. And, I was just fueled by, rage. And then thankfully I've matured, mostly, I think. And so yeah, I think life had to teach me. I had to
Mm.
unlearn, right?
Ah.
So
Uh-huh.
now when there is an elephant in the room, I get antsy. I'm like, we need to talk about this. This has to
Mhm.
be addressed. And so when people on the other side are like, oh, I don't do confrontation, that's what aggravates me. Because I'm like, this doesn't have to be an aggressive conversation, right? This can be I don't understand your perspective. Can you help me?
Mhm.
Like, let's be adults and talk about this. And I actually think that that's something that's wrong with the world right now. It's like we actually can't sit down and say, "Hey, we don't agree, but that's cool. Like,
Mhm.
tell me more about why you think what you think." So I think maturity and age has taught me that. Like, can we just talk about this for a sec? Like, I don't get it.
Absolutely. And you know what? Communication is like one thing that has to happen. It just has to. Let me ask you this. So with like knowing what you know now, as far as like being passive and whatnot, where do you find balance? Like, what do you teach your kids?
Yeah. It's interesting because I see they're all three incredibly different and doing different things in their lives. And I see my oldest son has a very low threshold for people taking advantage of him and will immediately nip it in the bud. He's like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, that's good.
And right, it's like, yeah, good for you. But he's less maybe diplomatic about it.
Hmm.
And my middle son also doesn't tolerate a lot of garbage, but he is a lot more diplomatic. And then my daughter, who's the youngest, she still gets really emotional.
Oh.
And when challenging situations come up, and she's married and she and her husband are expecting their first baby. And they're actually going through some challenging things right now. And she's like, Mom, I just got off the phone and cried. Like, I just couldn't understand why they weren't hearing me. And it's like, yeah, that comes with age
Mhm.
and experience and the ability to say, I'm sorry, you need to stop right now. And what you're saying to me doesn't make sense. So could you try again?
Mhm.
And it's honestly, it's okay to be like, oh, your tone of voice is like, it sounds like you're having a bad day. Like, that's my favorite thing to do when somebody's like being aggressive towards them. Oh my gosh, it sounds like you're having a bad day. I'm so sorry. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes when people respond that way, they don't actually realize
Mhm.
that they're doing that.
Mhm.
And then when you say something like that to them, they were like, no, I'm not having a bad day. What do you mean? It's like, you just have this tone in your voice that you just sound like you're having a really bad day. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
And you know, one thing that my mom always used to say that I didn't understand when I was younger, but I do understand it now is it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Because
Mhm.
you can say the same thing 50 different ways, like, and it'll mean 50 different things just on the way that you say it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Makes me think about when when my kids were young and you would tell them nicely to do something,
Mhm.
clean your room or eat your veg, whatever, do your homework. And then you say it a little more sternly, and then you say it again. And then by the end, you're like yelling,
Yep.
like a crazy person. Um, And it was like, you can't carry that into adulthood.
Mhm. That's so true. That is so true. Um, so let me ask you this. So I know you said you got married early and becoming a mom at such a young age and married, like, what was life like for you back then?
A blur. It was, yeah, it was challenging. I was a senior in high school, and we got married, and I ended up finishing high school. Our local community college had a high school completion program, and so I ended up finishing high school a little bit early, and then I started college. And my mother and my mother-in-law would babysit for me so I could go to school.
Mhm.
And so I think it was a lot of kind of trying to juggle parenthood, but I was still really young, and then trying to figure out how to be married, which I had, which was craziness. Um, so yeah, it was a lot, but I was very much like, no, I have a child. I have to be responsible now.
Mhm.
So I didn't go out. I lost all my friends except for three,
Mhm.
and I'm still friends with them today, because all my friends were going off to college and partying and all that stuff. Well, I didn't want to do any of that,
Yeah.
you know, um, and because I felt like, I'm already asking a lot of my family, and it's not their responsibility to raise my kid. And so I tried to step into my mother's shoes, I think, you
Mhm.
know, and even though she was like barely 5 feet tall, and, she wore like a kid size four, she was teeny tiny.
Mhm.
Um, like she wore some really big shoes, like even to this day, she passed away 2.5 years ago. And I'm even to this, like, I'm like, I will never be able to wear my mother's shoes. I
Yeah.
don't know how she did all the things that she did. She was incredibly talented. But, at 17, I was trying to be my mother, who my mother was at 55, and it ages you when you step into that role. I think in some good ways and some bad ways, because I became very rigid.
Mhm.
It was like, oh, like I was a little bit crazy, and now I'm going to become very rigid. One thing didn't work, we're going to try the other thing.
Yeah.
Um, and that pendulum has swung too, right? Age and wisdom shows us, like, yeah, you don't, the polar extremes don't work in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry about the loss of your mom too.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. That
Um,
was, that was tough.
yeah. Um, so how I know you said your sister is in recovery.
Mhm.
Congratulations to her.
Yes.
Um, how has like do you guys talk about the things that you went through? Like now that you're as you're like as an adults, and have a different
Yeah.
things?
We haven't in a long time, um probably should revisit some of those conversations. Um I think part of her recovery journey is facing some of those things. And so I want to be a support in that. And I think some things she might not be ready to, enter into the conversation. Uh, yeah, so it's something that's still floating out there. Uh, and still, there are still avenues of the relationship that need to be unpacked.
Yeah. And you know what? It's crazy because like me personally with my healing journey, healing from a lot of things in my past, one of the things that brought me the most healing was actually turning around to face those things that I had gone through. And a lot of them like I had forgotten about completely. Like God would bring them back to my memory and I'm like, whoa, like I forgot all about that situation,
Yeah.
but it's like sometimes we have to face it. And some people are not ready to face those things. I have people that are in my life that, um, that I would love to see healed, and they have such a hard time with dealing with the things that hurt them. And I
Yeah,
understand that, because we all like heal at our own pace, and
for
some
sure.
happenings, go a little deeper than others.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll definitely,
It's a journey. And you do have to be willing to step into the pain of the past one of the
Mhm.
most powerful exercises, things that I did, of course, other than therapy, because I did spend quite a bit of time in therapy, which I highly recommend. Um, but I was taking a coaching course, and one of the things that they wanted you to do was to journal basically the points in your life that stand out the most, both good and bad. And you kind of write a synopsis, and then the feelings that you had in the moment, and maybe the feelings that you have now, and then to do a reflection exercise on how that experience impacts you today and the lessons that
Mhm.
you learned. So basically reframing that experience.
Mhm.
And once I did that, I really was able to sit back and go, some of those really awful things that I experienced,
Mhm.
I learned a lot, and they are now gifts to me.
Yes. Mm.
And the opportunity that, years down the road that it provided me was an opportunity to step into growth and to step into healing and to step into peace and to recognize that, I truly believe that things, you can look at things, they happen to you or they happen for you. And a couple years ago, I was working with an executive coach, and I had worked for an extremely toxic organization.
Mhm.
And I was really, I had left the organization and I've been gone, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months or so, but I was really struggling to kind of unpack all the feelings that I had had, because I felt like I left everything on the table and then some for the
Yeah.
organization. And, um, and I was really struggling. Like I was carrying these bags around, and I was having this conversation with this coach. And 3 coaching sessions in, he said, "Stop." And I was like, "What, Lou?" he said, he's like, "Okay, we've had 3 sessions. In 3 times you have mentioned this same thing.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you realize that." And I was like, "No, I didn't realize that." And he said, "Put the bag down."
Mm.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You are carrying around a heavy bag. Put the bag down." And that was such a pivotal moment for me,
Mhm.
because in that moment, I actually visualized like dropping the 100-pound luggage,
Ah.
right? And then taking steps forward. And every time I start to pick something back up,
Mhm.
I literally hear Lou in my head saying, "Put the bag down." I'm like, "Oh, I gotta put the bag down."
Yeah.
uh,
And that's such a good way to think about it. Um, I was talking to my clients, and telling them we were talking about like forgiveness and holding grudges, right? And
yeah.
I told them, I'm like, when you hold a grudge against someone, or you pretty much like let them live in your head rent free.
Yes.
That's just like that's just like packing someone up in a bag in a suitcase and carrying them around with you all day.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is super heavy, that's heavy. And they're off living their life and just free and, you know,
Right. And aren't even thinking twice about
about
you.
you. Yeah.
Right. And I think that kind of goes back into, well, then is there a conversation that needs to be had? Right.
Absolutely.
Because I'm feeling wounded
Mhm.
and struggling to like reconcile what this is between us.
Mhm.
So then I have an opportunity. I can carry the bag around and be angry and hurt, or I can put the bag down and say, "Hey, like this is how I experienced the situation. And this is
Mhm.
how I'm feeling in the moment right now. And I feel like it's putting a wedge between us."
Absolutely.
So, there is this opportunity when I think about the organization that I worked with, and I think about when I dropped the bags, I think about what I was left with, because I grew so much there, and
Mhm.
I met some of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life that are still friends.
Aw.
And I learned professionally so many skills.
Mhm.
And so I could walk away with leaving the toxicity behind, but moving forward with these gifts.
Yep.
right? So, so I think about like when I dropped those bags, like I healed from that.
Mhm.
And when I did that reframing exercise, like I healed from, having a difficult first marriage and all of the junk that went on there.
Yeah.
And I healed from, just all of these life events that happened. And um, and now when I think about them, I don't think about them with a lot of pain.
Absolutely. Now let me ask you this. When you went to therapy, right? Because I don't think enough people go to therapy. Like,
Agreed.
it's this stigma about their therapy.
Yep,
Everybody should go to therapy.
I
So let me
agree.
ask you, I'm gonna ask you two questions in one. When you sought out therapy, what exactly were you looking for? Was it something specific, or you just like, I just need someone to talk to? And then also, when you did decide to go, can you tell everybody, just in case somebody that's listening is on the fence about therapy, can you tell everybody what therapy did for you? I know it helped you.
Yeah. So the first time I went to therapy, I went every week for a year.
Mhm.
And it was while I was married to my first husband. And um there was he traveled for work, and there was a lot of infidelity in our marriage. And I was trying to regain a sense. I wanted to save my marriage. But there's like this caveat that if you want to save your marriage, both people have to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Not one person can go and it work. It apparently does not work that way.
Mhm.
So, but what I was trying to gain from there was a sense of who I was again. Because at 17, when I stepped into the shoes of my 50-year-old mother, um, I fast forwarded over a lot because I was trying to be something that I wasn't. And and not that that was all bad, because I was trying to be this mature, responsible, teenager. But I didn't know who I was. And the messaging that I was receiving at home was, I just wasn't enough. And here's all the list of reasons how you're not enough.
Yeah.
And so I was like, but am I enough? And I just would have these ruminating thoughts that would just, kind of go on and on and on and on. And what the therapist helped me do was give me some tools to help stop those thoughts. And then also, um, just to speak life into myself. Right. And one of the tools, because, like when you have those ruminating thoughts, and I go like this towards the back of my head, because, all of that is from the amygdala, right? It's
Yeah.
the fight or flight. And it's the 8,000 fights that you have in your head, and it creates anxiety and the cortisol response and all of that. And it's a technique. It's just stop therapy. And so when you actually say the word stop, when you're in that headspace, your brain actually stops. Like if you
Really?
tell yourself to stop, yeah, try it. It is the craziest thing. And he said, the therapist said to me, he said, you might have to say it in the beginning, like stop, 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 stop.
Mm.
And he's like, if you're in the car and you like scream it, like
Wow.
at the top of your lungs, stop. I don't want to yell in the microphone, but at the top of your lungs, and your brain literally has to stop. He's like, your brain needs to rest.
Mm.
And if you allow this pattern of thinking to go on, it will impact the rest of your life. You
Mm.
have to stop this. So that was a really helpful tool. The other tool that he gave me, and this is really hard,
Yeah.
is uh, to do math in your head, right? And so, like, I am not a math person. And I'm like, please, do we have to do this? And he's like, yes, because when you are doing numbers, your mind can't think thoughts and emotions.
Wow.
So it's counting backwards from 100 by threes.
Oh man.
So think about how hard that was. And at one
Yeah.
point, I literally could like rattle it off really fast because I had
Yeah.
gotten so good. I was like, oh, I can do this in like 30 seconds or less.
Yeah.
Um, But because the numbers, when you're doing numbers and math in your head and
Wow.
counting, your brain stops thinking
Wow, that's amazing.
because you're triggering another portion of your brain.
Yeah.
So, those were some really helpful things that I learned in therapy. And then also just to continue to pursue myself
Mhm.
with the same kind of kindness and empathy that I would give to a friend that was hurting.
Absolutely. Yep.
And sometimes I think, we think that that's a weird concept and that
Mhm.
we don't deserve that same kind of love and self care, but we do. And it is the old adage, right? You can't pour from an empty cup.
Yep.
And what does filling that cup look like? It's different for everybody. You
Mhm.
know, I love a good massage like the next person. However, I love one of my very favorite things, and one of the ways try to fill my cup every day is I love to have my cup of coffee first thing in the morning outside early
Oh,
to watch the sunrise.
oh,
And that sets my day.
yeah.
It's a moment of gratitude. I have a devotional that I like to listen to every day. And so I'm watching the sun, I'm listening to the birds, I'm listening to my devotional, and sitting in a place of gratitude in
Mhm.
that moment for the opportunity.
Yep. Like you said, it sets the tone for the whole entire day. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try that number thing. I'm telling
Yes.
you, that is amazing because I if you think about it, and as you were telling me about it, I'm sitting here counting and everything else just like shut down.
It just
I
shuts
like
down.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, it shuts down. And it's challenging. You don't think, oh, like, well, how hard could it be? But, you
Yeah,
know, counting backwards by threes is actually pretty challenging.
it is. I think I only got to 94.
But also feel like you can't sleep at night,
Yeah.
and your mind starts going. It's a great way to help shut your mind down. And
Wow.
like and at some point you can go back to sleep.
I like that. Thank you. That is so helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so let me ask you this. When you started going to No, let me back up some. So anybody that's on the fence that's listening right now,
Yeah.
as far as therapy goes, what would you say to those that are maybe worried? Maybe you know how some people may worry, like, oh, this therapist may judge me, or I don't want to seem crazy, or what advice would you give to somebody that's straddling the fence about going to therapy?
Um, I would one of my very best friends is actually a therapist. And what I would say to somebody who is struggling is um just to rip the band-aid off. Do it. Have the phone call. Do just a meet and greet. Like a lot of times you can just kind of like, I don't, maybe you're not the right fit for me. I don't know. But just to step into that space, um, you will not regret it. There are so many incredible therapists out there doing phenomenal work that can really help you heal from the past. And I think, that's the difference between like coaching and therapy. And, there's mentoring, they're all different modalities and they all have their own place.
Mhm.
And when you're really trying to heal from things in the past, trying to wrestle your anxiety and figure out like, how do I overcome this, get a handle on it? A good therapist is the absolute best way to go.
Mhm.
And so I would just encourage you to rip off the band-aid. And if you're afraid to go by yourself, have a friend drive you. They're not going to be able to sit in the office with you, but they can be there as a source of support. Just go.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So when you started going to therapy and stuff, how long did it take you to notice that like you were starting to heal?
Yeah. So the first time I went for about a year, and I think I left that year definitely stronger
Mhm.
and able to see things in a different perspective and accept my responsibility, the parts that I was responsible for in my marriage. You can't fix somebody else. You can only fix yourself. You can't change for somebody else. You can only change for yourself. So the opportunity to recognize and to own my own parts, because
Mhm.
it takes two people to break a marriage. And even though I was not unfaithful to my husband, I did have an attitude, right? Like there were things in the marriage I was contributing
Mhm.
to the division in the relationship. So it gave me an opportunity to own my own part. And after that, I mean, we stayed married for probably another 7 years.
Mhm.
And I think I just continued along that path, and just experienced more of the same. And at some point, I was like, I just I'm going to end up on that TV show, Snapped. Right?
Oh
That's
no.
like I had
Yeah.
kind of hit that wall in my relationship
Yeah.
where I just thought I can't do this anymore. It's no longer healthy. It
Yeah.
hasn't been healthy for a long time,
Mhm.
but I wanted to do everything in my power
Mhm.
to save my marriage, and I couldn't. And ultimately, I feel like, God removed me from that situation for a purpose.
Mhm.
I came out of that. I'd been a stay-at-home mom. I came out of that, having to step into the workforce for the first time. And that was incredibly challenging because now all of a sudden I'm like, how am I going to support 3 kids and feed them and keep a
Mhm.
roof over our head and get them to all of their sporting activities and, do all the things. Um, and that's really kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing now,
Mhm.
is because when I stepped into the workforce, I had a very challenging first boss.
Mhm.
But the second man that I worked for, he and his wife, were mentors to me
Aw.
and really helped me heal. I did a lot of healing when I worked for them.
Mhm.
And part of that was, and I may actually get emotional when I talk about this, but um, my boss, he and his wife, they were so incredibly kind.
Mhm.
And I came out of a very stressful marriage where nothing I did was right.
Mhm.
And my husband would tell me, like, if you worked for me, I would fire you.
Wow.
So I thought every mistake I made,
Mm.
I was going to get fired. Right.
Yeah.
So there was this tension that I took into work. And I'll never forget, like, I made a mistake and I was sitting at my desk and my boss came up and he just very kindly was like, oh, hey, next time do X, Y, Z instead. Just very chill, very calm, very educational. Like the delivery was just like, oh, hey, do this instead next time. Like, no big deal. We fixed it.
Yeah.
And he walked away and I sank down into my office chair and hid behind the monitor and I cried
Aw.
because he was so kind.
Yeah.
And he and his wife are still very dear people to me. And that really helped me see, like, there are good people in the world,
Mhm.
and it's okay to be broken. It's okay to go to work broken,
Mhm.
but we have to see each other as human beings.
Yep.
And we have to be able to say, hey, you made a mistake, but you know what? We all do. And literally, there's pretty much all mistakes can be fixed, right? There's a
Mhm.
solution.
Yep.
Um, so I don't know if that answered your question. I might have got off a little.
No, that was good. You almost made me cry because you know what? So many times, like, we are in these toxic and just these relationships that tear us and break us down, right? Especially like with those of us that have been married. Like, a lot of times we get in these marriages and we feel like, I'm in this for the long haul. I want to, has got to work. Um, and oftentimes we get like just used and accustomed to not being treated right. So when we are crossing paths with these people that do treat us like we're human and do come from a place of empathy and a place of care, it's foreign to us.
Yeah.
And and so I definitely understand that. So let me ask you this, because I know, with you having supervisors and bosses like that, I know you fell in love with the work that you do. What were you doing for work when you were in that space?
So, it's interesting. People say that, like I see it on LinkedIn all the time. Oh, people don't leave jobs, they leave bad bosses. And I'm like, well, that's actually not true. I
Mhm.
adored my boss.
Mhm.
I adored his wife. I loved working for them,
Mhm.
but I just didn't enjoy what I was doing anymore. And I was working in the insurance industry and commuting, and it was tough with 3 kids, and it was like a 45-minute drive. And I found I was missing a lot,
Mhm.
and just trying to get, sports, and they were, uh, one in high school, one in middle school, one in elementary school.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, it was just this constant struggle. And I was relying on my oldest son who could drive to do for the other two, which also isn't fair, right?
Mhm.
It's not his job to be a parent.
Mhm.
And so, it just became, I had an opportunity to get a work from home job. And so I took it. But when I told my boss I was leaving, I sobbed
Aw.
because I didn't want to leave them, you know. I needed to take this other opportunity. And so yeah, they're just dear, dear, dear sweet people and still impacting the lives of other, right? Like
Yeah,
they're in leadership in other organizations and they're doing these same things for other people. And I think that was a lesson for me is that uh, is to treat the people that you're working with like they're human beings and they're struggling through the exact same things that we are struggling with, right? Like,
absolutely.
I mean, ultimately, like the human experience
Hmm.
should bring us together, not drive us apart.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so part of the work that I'm doing in working with single mothers is to be a bit of a mentor and a source of encouragement
Hmm.
because I was so encouraged in that season, not only by my boss and his wife, but also I had some really good friends who stepped into the gap and helped me with my children and were a positive sounding board and wouldn't let me get away with garbage, right? Like they're like, okay, Robyn, like dial it back.
Yeah. But that's good because we all need that. Like, I want friends that are gonna keep me in check,
Yeah,
because I don't want to don't tell me what you think I want to hear. No, I need to know when I'm wrong, so that I can
exactly.
take corrective action and fix my behavior, so that I'm not wronging anybody.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because we're friends, you don't have to put up my crap. Like tell me so I can get right.
That's right. That's right. It's like you can tell me that I'm, being
Yeah.
a knucklehead. It's totally fine.
Yeah. So before I close this out, I want to know you say and you kind of got off into my next question. So what is it that you do now? And yeah, you want to tell everyone about that?
Sure. I have a podcast too. It's called Above and Not Beneath. And that actually comes from Deuteronomy 28:13. And it's a prayer, part of a prayer that my mom used to pray over my sister and I. And it's you're the head and not the tail, you're above and not beneath, and blessed are the fruits of your labor. So she kind of married these various scripture verses. And I think at my lowest points, I would just remember that. And it was like
Mm,
the word says that I am above and not beneath.
mm,
And when I was at my lowest, thinking that, I was like the gum on the bottom of the shoe, that was the world telling me a lie.
mm,
And so that gave me strength and hope.
mhm,
And so I started a podcast also just to provide encouragement for other people, predominantly, I mean, I think my audience is mostly women,
mhm,
but it's universal,
mhm,
right? Hope and encouragement is universal. It's part of our shared experience as human beings. And some of the other work that I'm doing is doing some group coaching, and I use a method called positive intelligence. And what I love about it is that it addresses the way we self sabotage and
mm.
that inner judge.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And so that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we could dive down. But yeah, we, that inner judge, that inner critic, when we can get a handle on it and put it in its place, sometimes it's a warning signal, right? There can be a warning and it's like putting your hand on the hot stove. That is helpful for 1 second, be like, ooh, that's hot.
Mhm,
When our judge kicks in or when we get to hyper achievement, when we're just chasing, 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 there's a signal there to us that says, hold on,
mhm,
there's something else here, you're filling a void.
mhm.
And then that can get in the way of other things like relationships and all kinds of things. So I use this methodology called now I can't speak positive intelligence.
Mm. Okay, that's really good. And you know what? So like oftentimes God deals with me about showing myself grace, right?
Yes.
Like you said, we are our biggest critic. And
Hmm.
a lot of times we just are really hard on ourselves, and we don't show ourselves grace, and we don't give ourselves room for error, right? And
Yeah.
it's like one thing that God told me, and he put me in check with this, and I'm like, but you know what? Thank you, because I needed this. Um, this was like last year sometime. He was talking to me about having like showing myself grace, and he was showing me like you're supposed to be a reflection of me. You know how God tells us to love others and be a reflection of him. He's like, but you got to do the same thing with yourself. That's the way that you're treating yourself is not the way that I treat you,
Hmm.
and so I'm like, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
So I was appreciative of that revelation, and it's helped me, and it's helped me help other people too, so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, that's so good. There's a really good exercise kind of in that same vein. And it's you take a childhood picture, so under the age of like 10,
Hmm.
and you really study the picture.
Hmm.
And you'll notice that the inner judge is going to start picking it apart, right? It's like, no, sorry, this is a beautiful child.
Hmm.
This is a child that has a sparkle in their eyes
Hmm.
and that's creative. And you start speaking all of the things of who you were created to be, right? Before the world put the layers on.
Yep.
And it's like,
Oh.
no, this is a smart child. This is a capable child. This
Hmm.
is a child who, is funny and caring. And you start listing all of those traits that, maybe have gotten buried. And every time the judge starts to pick it, you picture that child in your mind. You're like, no, I was created to be a loving, kind, compassionate, gracious human being. And I can do that for others. I can do it for myself.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's some good stuff. So one last question before I close this out. If people want to work with you,
Mhm.
or want to reach out to you, how can we find you?
Sure. My website is abovenotbeneath.org. And the podcast is listed there. It's a little bit under construction, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll have an opportunity where you can book a coaching call with me. But also, the positive intelligence, there are 2 assessments that will help you see, assess what
Mhm.
your top 2 inner critics are. What your top 2 saboteurs are. And it's kind of it's kind of fun to go down that rabbit hole. When I first did it, I was like, yeah, this is whatever, this is not it. And then I started really researching and reading, and I was like, oh, I totally do that. Like, this is absolutely
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
But it's been really helpful on my journey to just to recognize and to become more aware
Yeah.
of, my thoughts and my feelings, and our thoughts drive our emotions.
Yep.
And when you can start to just kind of have some awareness there. So yeah, those things would be on the website.
Oh, that's good stuff. Okay. I want to thank you again for this. I appreciate you. Man, this episode. I all the other guests better watch out, because I don't know. This is a pretty good one right here.
It's been tremendous fun. And I am so deeply grateful to you for having
Aw,
me on.
no problem. You're welcome back anytime.
Yes, I would love that.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Let the Healing Begin podcast. Please head over to the t-shirt and hoodie store and support us at www.greatergrowthllc.com. You can also support us by heading over to Amazon and purchasing a copy of Back in My Day by Asia Wilson. And until next time.